Good afternoon once again. I am Bamidele Osamika. I'm the Regional Climate Collaborating Manager at Green Umbrella. Green Umbrella is a regional climate collaborative for Greater Cincinnati. We have been serving as a backbone for environmental and sustainability work in Greater Cincinnati for 25 years. Over the years, we have connected hundreds of members, local government, non-profit, businesses, as well as passionate individuals through our collective impact approach to tackling most complex and pressing environmental challenges for our community faces. This webinar series is titled Climate Change and the Risk of Vector-Borne Illnesses in Greater Cincinnati. The 1-hour webinar hopes to explore the connections between climate change, causes of vector-borne illnesses, including ticks, mosquitoes, and the health outcomes. Our panelists will make a brief presentation followed by a Q&A. Then we will wrap up with next steps and some announcement. With the recent change in Green Umbrella's identity from Sustainability Alliance to the Regional Climate Collaborative, Green Umbrella joins more than 30 other collaborators across the country, all of them working on cross-jurisdictional climate action. And given our staff and existing programs and a partnership that we have established over the years, Green Umbrella is now actually the largest regional climate collaborative in the country. Green Umbrella serves a 10-county region across Southwest Ohio, Northern Kentucky, Southeast Indiana. Myself, Nobi Kennedy, who is our Regional Climate Collaborative Coordinator, and Savannah Sullivan, who is our Senior Director of Programs and Climate Strategy, are the three primary staff members supporting our climate health equity work. Alongside our climate health fellows, Mitch Sinstock, a 4-year medical student at the University of Cincinnati Medical School, and Elia Rose, who is an undergraduate student at the University of Cincinnati. The Climate Health Equity webinar series builds on the recently completed report in partnership with Scioto Analysis. To highlight the findings from this report and to accelerate actions on key issues, we have released a public service announcement toolkit connected to topics covered in this webinar series. Please visit our website and other social media platforms to download and read full report. This campaign will cover 11 climate health topics, one per month. It will provide data and shareable media materials every month. Additionally, the campaign will share actionable strategies at the individual, institutional, and system levels. This month public service announcement campaign covers climate health and the risk of vector-borne illnesses in Greater Cincinnati. Do you know that vector is a living thing that carries a disease, causing agents such as bacteria, vector, virus, among others, between individuals, between species? Vector-borne diseases as the illnesses primarily spread through vector. An example of this is Lyme disease, which is a bacterial illness that primarily infects humans through tick bites. Do you also know that common vectors are biting insects and rodents? These animals are happiest in warmer and wet environments, as well as mild winter period. Do you know that due to unique features of our region and changing climate, and as well as biodiversity of pests, Greater Cincinnati is prone to vector-borne illnesses? Then what can you do? What can institutions do? At this juncture, they would like to introduce our guest speaker, who will dissect this topic and be ready to provide answers to our questions. So we have two panelists on this call. So the first one is Dr. Joshua Benoit. Joshua is a professor in the Department of Biological Science at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Benoit research centers on the integrative physiology of arthropods, particularly stress tolerance, dominance-induced changes, reproduction using blood feeding, including bedbugs and mosquitoes, among others, and non-blood feeding arthropod models. Dr. Benoit has published over 180 research papers on arthropods biology since 2003, with over 70 focused on blood-feeding arthropods. Along with this publication, Dr. Benoit has presented over 180 occasions and received 43 scientific awards. Please join me as I welcome Dr. Benoit, Joshua Benoit, as I make his presentation. Dr. is all yours.
Thank you so much. So we can get started if you're ready. I think we just have to go. So yeah, today I'm briefly just going to talk about the ticks of Cincinnati, a little bit about tick-borne diseases, and how this is probably going to change over the next few years and how it's already changing now. And so it's pretty much we know a lot about that's going on with these changes and processes. And so I'm going to talk about that. So we can go to the next slide. So to highlight a little bit on some like tick-borne diseases, in a lot of different areas, they're increasing throughout the world. And so particularly like Illinois as an example here, this is a paper 2019 showing that there's an increase in Lyme disease, mainly in a few other tick-borne disease. And this is mainly due to more overlap between people as they're outside, changing tick distribution, those aspects. And so Allison, Dr. Parker will talk about the ticks the mosquitoes afterwards. Ticks are a little bit more, they seem to transmit a much bigger variety of infective agents. Mainly, we always joke and say like a mosquito is a clean needle and a tick's a dirty needle. So I move ahead to the next slide. And so there's really two major groups of ticks. There's hard ticks on the left and soft ticks on the right. Soft ticks commonly live as nest parasites. And at least in this region, they're here, but you're usually never exposed to them. So it's not a big worry. Usually diseases from those are west of the Mississippi. So today we'll probably talk about hard ticks on the left. And these are the ones such as like black-legged ticks that are associated with Lyme disease, or American dog ticks are associated with Rocky Mountain spotted fever. So, and these are the ones you get outside and from walking around with your pets and that sort of aspects. So next slide. So this is just to show an image of what the difference between an unfed tick and a fed tick looks like. So when ticks feed, they'll actually bite onto you, pierce into your skin, and then feed for a period of a few days. During that time, they're actually spitting fluid back into you. And this is what will transmit the diseases. And then they're concentrating the blood meal within their body, and then they use the blood to either advance to the next stage or to lay eggs. So those are the two ones you usually see. So, all right, for the life cycle here, mainly you have adult ticks that will usually feed on some sort of larger animal like a dog or a deer or a raccoon on the right. They'll lay eggs. Larvae will emerge. So the females will lay hundreds to thousands of eggs. A small larva will emerge as about the size of a period. It will usually feed on smaller animals. And this is the stage they usually pick up the diseases from feeding on these smaller animals as a nymph or larva. And then each blood meal, they'll advance the stage and go back to the adulthood again. And so a lot of how long this life cycle takes is a lot of aspects with temperature, humidity, if they can find a host, those aspects. So next slide. All right, so now we can get to a little bit of the ticks that are found in the Cincinnati area. So at least for hard tick, this is mainly 5 different species. Historically, the one you most likely been to encounter would be the American dog tick, Dermacentor variabilis. Recently, in some areas, we're seeing an uptick of Gulf Coast ticks, mainly kind of on the western side of Cincinnati. Black-legged ticks are associated with Lyme disease, have been here for a period of time, but we're starting to see increased levels of them on the east side of Cincinnati, coming from that direction predominantly. Next slide. And then the two other ones we have seen, the longhorn tick was a recent introduced invasive species that has been moving from the East Coast relatively rapidly, and they're now seeing them in a lot of areas of northern Kentucky and in counties within Ohio. And it's predominantly associated an issue with cattle in those aspects, but you could be exposed to it as well. And then there's the Lone Star tick, Amblyomma americanum. Historically, a more southern species, but now is moving more north and is becoming more prevalent kind of around the Cincinnati metropolitan area. So next slide. So, all right, so this is generally from the CDC and the distribution of tick-borne diseases throughout the US. Most of the diseases, everybody says, oh, there's just a lot more diseases on the East Coast. What people don't realize, no one lives in the Western US other than in California and in some cities. So there's just a lot less people there. And so that's why it's effectively empty. But the areas you see up in kind of the upper Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, in the Northeast, and then kind of Missouri, Tennessee, Arkansas area, you see a lot of high levels here. And it's a variety of different diseases from Lyme disease, ehrlichiosis, Rocky Mountain spotted fever, a lot of different diseases it can be. So, all right. So what are some of the diseases that you can be commonly be exposed to? So the two of the main ones would be Rocky Mountain spotted fever, predominantly transmitted by the American dog tick. It has a 1 to 2 week incubation. It has a high level of mortality. So if you get this disease and you don't get treated, you can actually die from it pretty effectively. The treatment is just a basic antibiotic. And then the main one people worry about is Lyme disease, and then that's transmitted by Borrelia. That's associated with black-legged ticks and transmitted by, and the organism is a Borrelia bacteria, and it's a spirochete, so it's kind of related to bacteria like syphilis. And it has low, go ahead and go back, it has low mortality. But this is the big issue with this one is you have a lot of long-term chronic issues, those sort of aspects. And people always assume, oh, you always get these red circles with the bites if you're infected. Those don't always happen either. And so they only happen, I think it's in 60 to 70% of the time. So it's a chronic disease and it has long-term issues. So you can go ahead to the next one. Ehrlichiosis is transmitted by multiple tick species, and there's multiple species of Ehrlichia. You get general flu-like symptoms. They can occur at 1 to 2 weeks. Again, the issues with this can be severe if it's not treated. And so you can be severe, you can end up with death. But again, it's just doxycycline treatment for that one. And then anaplasmosis, which is related to ehrlichiosis, is another one that's predominantly transmitted by black-legged ticks. So the same ones that will give you Lyme disease. And so this will have general flu-like symptoms, but also can be severe if not treated. There's a lot more variety of other kind of viruses, and that like Heartland virus or Powassan virus. I can never say that right. And so, and like there's other diseases associated with them, but these are the main kind of drivers of tick diseases associated with ticks. So, all right, so these are just some old graphs on the historical distribution of ticks. And so there's some ticks, like I didn't mention it, but there's a brown dog tick that is known to be distributed kind of throughout the US, but in this area, it will be a problem. It can actually infest kennels. And then there's other aspects. There's not really one you find outdoor. The Gulf Coast tick and the Lone Star tick, both now can be found within Cincinnati area. Then there's some other tick species, like if you're on the Western United States, they have their own dermacentor tick, dermacentor andersoni, but will probably be exposed to the American dog tick in the eastern U.S. And then you'll also see the deer tick or the black-legged tick, Ixodes scapularis, within our region now. So, all right. So then the one big question everybody has is how are tick distributions and the diseases shifting with climate change? And so there's been a lot of work on this. There's a lot of individuals that focus on doing field collections, understanding where ticks are and those sort of aspects. So the easiest way to partially look at this, not only with tick collection, is seeing where diseases are occurring more often. So what you're actually seeing is if you look at these differences in Lyme disease from 1996 to 2018, you're seeing kind of this eastward, this western push from the eastern United States, and more cases moving across Pennsylvania into Ohio. But then also it's from the upper Midwest, it's moving down kind of through Wisconsin, along Lake Michigan into northern Indiana. So to this region, it's kind of coming from two different directions when you think about Lyme disease and Lyme disease ticks. So, and then if you look at this follows the distribution of the ticks as well. So there's surveys every single over multiple years, and you're seeing the same patterns happening with black-legged ticks as well. So you're seeing them moving south from the areas they used to be in the upper Midwest down into Indiana and those aspects. But then you're also seeing the northeast populations moving west into Ohio and becoming more prevalent within those areas. And again, we do have them in Cincinnati. There was just a grad student in Hamilton County. We had a grad student early this year actually get Lyme disease. And so she was in the field doing not tick work, but then she got Lyme disease and got treated really early though. So, all right. So this kind of just highlights the shifting distribution of black-legged ticks. So we're pretty much on a two-front war with these. And so they're coming from both the east and the west. And I would not be surprised within the next few years that if we have what would be black-legged tick distributions more like the Northeast. And so the main reason I say that in the Northeast, you can find parks within cities that are littered with black-legged ticks. We don't have that here. Now, if you take your dog for a walk in a park within the city, there's not that many ticks usually, but that may be changing the next few years. So, all right, and then this is kind of some more long-term distribution changes associated with the ticks, and this is based on modeling. And what's happening is they're kind of just moving down into this Midwest area in Cincinnati, and then we'll also be moving northward as well with more mild winters and those aspects. So they'll have a much bigger distribution over a long period of time. So, but what does this mean for a lot of tick species? So this is the shifting distribution of the American dog tick. So in A, you'll see where they're kind of currently surviving and able to distribute. But then as the years progress, you move to like 2050 in B there, you'll see that areas that they currently live now may actually become inhospitable. So mainly they get too warm. Our winters are too warm. They can't survive. They're not adapted to live in these areas. So they'll actually potentially make a drastic northward distribution and may eventually disappear from this area. It's important to say, though, for some of these that if they disappear, then we're probably going to end up with more Gulf Coast ticks and Lone Star ticks. And to be honest, I'd rather have American dog ticks than Lone Star and Gulf Coast ticks because they are a lot more aggressive species. All right, so in generally preventing ticks and tick-borne diseases. So the big one on the left is if you're in an area with ticks, is you've got to do daily tick checks. If you think you're going to be exposed, you got to look and check in those aspects, and then you want to move the ticks immediately. If you find a tick and it's walking around on your body, you're good to go. It didn't give you a disease, it didn't bite you yet, that sort of stuff. But you want to get it usually within a day or less. And so remove it. And then when you remove the tick, remember you do not want to like do stuff like cover it in Vaseline, burn it with a lighter, those aspects. Those don't really work and actually can, in some ways, can actually increase disease transmission to you. After you get the tick, you can save it, throw it in your freezer in a bag in that aspect, because later on, it's sometimes easier to test the tick for the disease than to test you for the disease. And so if you get some symptoms. You can also do aspects in your yard to create areas where you create a perimeter in those aspects to try to prevent ticks in your own yard. And so those are the major ways to kind of do it. If you're going to be in areas hiking, that sort of stuff, where there's a high prevalence of ticks, you may even want to use some sort of repellent, either like a permethrin or DEET, and that can actually help to reduce the tick numbers. All right, and so what do we do at the University of Cincinnati to understand tick biology? So I included some pictures here, and I see Andrew Rosendale. He is a former member of my lab. He came in today, and we've done some studies on understanding tick biology over the last few years, and I'll talk briefly about two of those right now. So go ahead. So we did a study examining how starvation impacts ticks, and mainly to say like how prolonged periods with no host impacts their biology. So the one big thing that we found for this, we did a lot of understanding the biology, but what you actually see is that as starvation increases, they become much more aggressive. They will quest more frequently, and questing is what ticks do when they're looking for a host. And so this is identified some aspects that are critical with their starvation biology. So we also wanted to look at some cold tolerance aspects with ticks and looking at how they survive the winter. And so this is a study that was published in 2022, looking at how they respond to cold stress. And so we did a lot of work with this, but what we were able to identify is we did this thing called metabolomics, where you can actually analyze all these like different little biomolecules within the ticks. And then we were able to find this one called betaine that was showed to be very critical. If you expose them to really cold temperatures, it actually increased their survival. So this was just understanding how they survive through the winter. So some of the summary with this, tick distribution is really rapidly changing with climate change. So they're moving, we're seeing big distribution changes. A lot of species are moving northward into new areas, and this will continue as we keep chronically getting warmer summers and more mild winters. And these shifts in distribution are changing what diseases we can be exposed to. And not only that, is we're encroaching more into natural areas where you can also be exposed. And so you really want to monitor tick populations in the presence of pathogens to know risk in new areas. And really a lot of studies are needed to understand tick biology in relation to climate change to really establish where specific species will survive as the climate changes over the next 40 to 50 years. And so this will really allow us to understand their biology. So this is just acknowledged some people within the lab. Most of the tick work was done by Dr. Andrew Rosendale. He has the hat there, and Ken Oyen. She's the lady with the brown shirt and then the glass vials there. And then we've had a few really good undergrads helping out with projects, including like David, Madison, Alicia, Ben, and Atit over the last few years. And some funding for this was provided by the USDA, NSF, NIH, and UC. So I know this is usually my question slide, but I know we're waiting and going to do questions at the end. So this is just my info here if anybody wants to get in contact with me.
All right. Thank you, Dr. George, for your presentation. Yeah, they are quite informational. So our second panelist on the call today is Dr. Allison Parker. Dr. Allison Parker is an assistant professor in the Department of Biological Science and Environmental Science program at Northern Kentucky University. Allison earned a Ph.D. in entomology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Prior to attending grad school, Dr. Allison was a high school science teacher in Dallas, Texas, through Teach for America. Allison researched with Northern Kentucky University undergraduate students and community partners to explore how social factors such as socioeconomic status and human land use impact mosquito and tick ecology, vector-borne illnesses spread, as well as the effective vector control practice in the region. Please join me as I welcome Dr. Parker to make a presentation.
Thank you for that introduction. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk about mosquitoes today, since Josh talked about ticks. Next slide. And before we can talk about the impacts of climate change, we first need to have some background information about mosquitoes so that we can talk about how their ecology is going to be impacted. Next slide. So the first thing is that mosquitoes are flies. A lot of people don't know that. And all flies have 3 body parts, like all insects: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. 6 legs, like all insects. And flies, one of their defining characteristics is that they only have 1 pair of wings. And this is important when we're trying to distinguish mosquitoes from other flies that look somewhat similar. So mosquitoes, one thing that is a defining characteristic is that they have that forward projecting mouth part, and they have scales on their bodies. They look kind of hairy instead of smooth, and their wings are folded over top of each other and onto their back. So the crane fly on the left, people always think that's a mosquito. Easy to know it's not, because its wings are spread. And midges, which are small flies that sometimes also people confuse for mosquitoes, they have smooth bodies, and you could see both of their wings. They're not folded over top of each other. So if you're ever looking, oh, that's a mosquito in my house or something, these are ways to tell that you have a mosquito or not a mosquito. Next slide. So there's close to 3,500 species of mosquitoes globally. We have about 176 known species in the United States. And across Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky, we have about 60 species. Now, most of these species are just nuisance species, so they're just going to be annoying. Nobody wants to get bit by a mosquito, but we do have a few that we're concerned about for spreading diseases. And one of the things that I find fascinating about mosquitoes is that they have a very complex life cycle, where the adults, which are the ones most people are most familiar with, fly around in the terrestrial or land habitat. The males and the females will drink nectar or other sugar sources to provide energy to fuel their bodies. And it's only female mosquitoes that feed on blood. And they do this so that they can have the nutrients to make their eggs. The females will then lay their eggs in aquatic habitats, and the aquatic habitat will depend on the species. The larvae then develop within the aquatic habitat, eating microbes and other things. Then they will go through their pupal stage, which is where they're metamorphosizing from the worm-like larval stage into the adult mosquito stage. Next slide. So there's lots of different types of mosquito larval habitats, and it's important to know about these. If you have mosquitoes in your yard and you're trying to get rid of them, you need to know what types of habitats they can be found in. Container breeding mosquitoes, which are the mosquitoes that I mainly focus on in my research lab, can be found in natural containers, like the tree hole or rock pools that you see pictures of on this slide. But humans are really great at making containers and then leaving them outside to get full of water and leaves. They could be things like stormwater catch basins, depending on how those are constructed, clogged rain gutters, buckets, discarded tires, which are a major problem in our region, and my lab does a lot of work on these. But it can also be something as small as a flower pot saucer, a bottle cap, or even a small puddle in a tarp in your yard. We also have floodwater mosquitoes, and you're going to find these mosquitoes in natural pools that are more temporary. So if you have a place in your yard that fills with water after a heavy rain, after that rain, you might find more mosquitoes in your yard. It's because they're breeding in these temporary natural habitats. And then we have permanent water mosquitoes that are found on the edges of lakes and ponds. They could be found in culverts or large ditches that tend to hold water for long periods of time, and in swamps, marshes, and wetlands. Next slide, please. So there's 3 main groups of mosquitoes that we have in this region. So I'm just going to go over a few of the ones that we tend to see regularly in our area. So the first major group is Aedes, and the Asian tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus, is a really common mosquito around here. It's invasive. it is found, it is able to transmit a wide range of pretty nasty diseases like dengue, Zika, and chikungunya viruses. If you're ever outside, it is that black mosquito with these very distinct white stripes that just flies around even in the middle of the day. We tend to find the Asian tiger mosquito in more urban areas, but it is able to survive in suburban, rural, and natural habitats as well. The eastern treehole mosquito, Aedes tricereatus, is one of our native mosquito species, and it is able to transmit a wide range of pathogens that we find that are native to the area, like St. Louis encephalitis, and eastern equine encephalitis, but we tend to find this species in forested, more natural habitats. And then the Asian rockpool mosquito, Aedes japonicus, is another invasive mosquito species, and that we tend to find in suburban, rural, and natural habitats in the region. Next slide, please. The Anopheles species, these are the vectors of malaria worldwide. We have species of Anopheles that can transmit malaria in the region, but we have eradicated the pathogen. And so if a lot of people say came back from traveling and they all had malaria and they got bit by a lot of these mosquitoes, we could see localized transmission. The woodland malaria mosquito, Anopheles punctipennis, is one of our more common Anopheles mosquitoes around here, but we tend to find Anopheles more in wooded natural habitats. Next slide. And then the Culex group, they're the last major group of mosquitoes. These mosquitoes tend to be brown and boring, but they're probably the mosquitoes most of you have come in contact with. They prefer to feed on birds, but they will feed on us if we need to. They are the main vectors of West Nile virus in the region. And we find them throughout the region, not as much in urban habitats, but they are there, but they are the most common mosquito in our suburban habitats. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about a little bit about the impacts of climate change on mosquitoes in the region. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of different factors that can impact mosquito distributions in an area. So some environmental factors, temperature, precipitation, and flooding, land cover, so how much tree canopy cover might you have. In general, for most mosquitoes, the warmer it gets, the more likely we will see the mosquitoes. That's not true for every single species, but we'll look at temperature in a little bit more detail in a little bit. Precipitation, which you might have noticed this year, the more precipitation we have, the more mosquitoes we have, because we tend to then have more habitats available for larval development. So this year we've had more rain than we normally have in the month of May. I think we're over 5 inches of rain over the average. And so the number of mosquitoes that we've been collecting out in the field has been higher than I've ever seen it since I've lived in this region. Some areas that are prone to flooding, with increase in flooding, you can have an increase in those floodwater mosquito species as well. And then land cover, the more trees you have in a region, the more resting places you have for adult mosquitoes. So we tend to see correlations with more land, more trees, more mosquitoes. For social factors, those also impact mosquitoes, especially those that are very urbanized. So urbanization will impact which species we see. So the more urbanization we have, we tend to get mosquitoes that have become more specialized to feed on humans and live in man-made containers, like the Asian tiger mosquito, Aedes albopictus. Socioeconomic status will also impact where we see mosquitoes. Research has shown that regardless of land use, whether you're urban, suburban, or rural, lower socioeconomic status areas will have higher numbers of mosquitoes. And then how we're using the land will also impact what mosquito species we tend to see. So some will be better at urban areas, some better in rural areas, and how we're using that land, whether it's for people to live, whether it's industrial plants, will also impact mosquitoes. So it's not just climate change. So it's hard to study this with mosquitoes in particular because there's so many other factors that might impact mosquito prevalence. But we're going to look at a specific example on the next slide. So this study was looking at the impact of temperature on mosquito distribution for two species of concern. Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito, which we already talked about, has an optimal temperature range between about 67 degrees and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, which is why we see it here now. It's able to deal with our cold winters, and then we have the perfect temperatures in the summer for it. The yellow fever mosquito, Aedes aegypti, is found in the southern United States, and we currently don't have it here because it gets too cold in the winters for it to survive. But with models of climate change, you could see here this model was for a 2.6 degree increase. You can see that the distribution of these mosquitoes is expanding and moving further and further north throughout the United States. And so models predict that in our region, we will start to see Aedes aegypti as well as have increased populations of Aedes albopictus, which is concerning for us because these two mosquitoes can transmit some pretty gross, nasty diseases that we don't want to have. So it's just thinking about how we're going to control these species when they become more prevalent or when they enter our region in the future. Next slide. So the overall impacts in our region in particular, based on climate change, is that we will see an increase in the duration of the mosquito season. It's getting warmer earlier and gets cooler later in the season. And so we'll have a longer period of optimal temperature for most of our mosquito species. So we'll just have more days of being able to get bit by a mosquito. We'll see an increased transmission period for viruses and pathogens we already have here, including West Nile virus, St. Louis encephalitis, Eastern equine encephalitis, and dog heartworm. So a longer period of exposure, which could increase people and animals getting infected with these diseases. We will have the ability of new mosquito species to survive in this region, including the yellow fever mosquito, Aedes aegypti. And because of this increase in temperature and precipitation in the region, we might see an increased risk of certain mosquito-borne diseases like dengue, chikungunya, Zika viruses, for example, that we don't really worry about in this region right now, but we might have to start worrying about them in the next 40 to 50 years. Next slide. So what can you do? Next slide. So there's a few things that you can do as an individual to help to reduce mosquito populations, because that's the best way we're going to make sure we don't get infected with mosquito-borne diseases. The first is remove any type of standing water from your yard. So if you have a bucket like pictured here, those little things you see in the water, those are all mosquito larvae. Dump out any buckets, watering cans, anything that holds standing water. If you have an area on your property that holds water after it rains, you can install a rain garden, as seen in the second picture on the bottom, to help reduce that amount of standing water. Keep rain gutters clean and draining properly. If you have some sort of habitat that you can't dump out easily, say maybe you have a bird bath or a rain barrel in your yard, you can buy BTI, which is a naturally occurring bacteria found in the soil. And you can use either the dunks, which are pictured here, or little pellets, and you add them to the aquatic habitat. And it specifically targets mosquitoes, black fly, and fungus gnat larvae. And this bacteria is spiky. And so when these organisms eat it as larvae, the bacteria pierces through their stomach and kills them. And there's no toxicity to people, or if you have if a pet like your dog drinks out of the water, they will be totally fine. So those are things you could do in your yard to reduce the number of mosquitoes. Next slide, please. If you are going outside, you can use repellents to help protect yourself, which Josh talked about a little bit for the ticks. One thing you can do is you can look for the repellency awareness graphic, which you can see on the bottom of the slide. They will tell you if it works for mosquitoes, ticks, or both, and the number of hours that that particular repellent works for the duration that it should be effective for. And you can also go on the EPA's website and find which insect repellent is right for you. It will tell you things like the active ingredient, if is it good for ticks and or mosquitoes, how long does it last for? So those are things that you can look for. You can also treat your clothes with insecticidal repellents before you go outside. You can purchase permethrin treated clothing, or you can spray your clothes with permethrin the night before going out on a hike and things like that. And then you could use things like DEET to protect yourself. Next slide. And I'd just like to acknowledge all of my research students. There's only a few of them pictured here. They are essential for me to do my research, and I'd like to acknowledge my funding, Northern Kentucky University, the Association of Public Health Laboratories, the Kentucky Academy of Sciences, and community partners that let me use their lands or have worked with us on some of our research projects. And that's my contact information if you would like to get in touch with me.
All right, Dr. Allison Parker, thank you for those presentation. Is quite helpful. Thank you. So at this moment, we would like to ask questions from our panelists. So, boys, like we have a couple of questions in the chat. So, Shirley, can we trade the one at the chat first? If we still have time, then we can add more.
Sure. Yeah. We looks like most of the questions in the chat are coming from Green Umbrella staff. So I just want to encourage any other attendees, if you have questions, throw them in there. We want to make sure we're hearing from you as well. The first question was about the chemical treatments that that Andrew mentioned, that Dr. Benoit mentioned to prevent ticks in your yard, and if those chemicals have an effect on pollinators.
Yes. So just yes. So tick treatments, there's not a good like the BTI for mosquitoes and the larvae and that sort of stuff. There's not a good treatment for ticks. It's usually typical industrial pesticides or acaricides, if you want to call them that. And usually you have to be careful of application, that sort of thing. And even yard-based applications really aren't even necessarily that effective for them. It's mainly like maintenance. It's making sure like to cut back like the edging of your yard far enough away where the area's not going to be, making sure there's not habitats for small rodents in those areas and getting that away from you. That's the more important aspect rather than an application, because ticks relatively have a high resistance to a lot of the pesticides, just their baseline. And if you don't hit them at the exact right time, then it's not gonna be help. So it's usually checking yourself and then some kind of like making sure like yard mitigation to prevent areas where they survive.
Okay, cool. And so more like targeted application of any chemicals in specific areas versus like blanket spraying and trying to balance the needs of the pollinators with, you know,
It just the blanket spraying of a whole yard is just not going to be that effective for ticks.
Cool.
Probably end up being a waste of money.
And then we had another question about green infrastructure projects, and if there were any recommendations for, you guys mentioned, like, I know Dr. Parker mentioned specifically some installing rain gardens and different ways that we could deal with these populations. Are there any other sort of key recommendations for specific green infrastructure projects, either on an individual homeowner property level or more that we could do collaboratively and collectively across the region that can help manage tick and mosquito populations? And obviously there's different contexts of urban or suburban and rural settings to consider.
Yeah, for mosquitoes, there's a lot of different things that we can do with green infrastructure, specifically when we're thinking about how we manage our water. So anything that we can do, like putting in rain gardens or things like that, that can help to reduce standing water is going to be helpful. Also redoing our stormwater catch basins so they don't hold water below the outlet tube. Things like that can be really helpful in reducing mosquito populations. I don't know if there's as much for tick management for green infrastructure, just because of the tick life cycle. It's not going to be impacted as much. You're not going to have reductions in ticks because you put in a rain garden, for example.
The only thing that I know with ticks is there's been a push to like do like drug treatment of like mice and so then you can kill them in those early stages. But other than that, that would be probably some of the closest stuff that you get to like a more green treatment.
Well, on that note, I guess, I'll just ad lib here. I know that there's like more of a push for folks who are interested in not just doing, being more low mo and transitioning away from having like clean manicured landscapes to having more habitat. And I wonder if there's any ways that we can balance, that you can do those things in a way that won't breed, will manage the tick populations. Are there certain plants that you could incorporate on the edges, or ways that you can incorporate, like design those areas to be less prone for tick populations to grow?
Probably, but it's just the right combination of plants and that sort of thing. If you're going to end up going kind of that more natural landscape, that sort of aspect. Right now, particularly if you're within the city limits, you're probably fine. It's if like the black-legged ticks show up in force, those do well in smaller parks and those aspects kind of, as long as there's deer and mice there, then they'll survive there. And so like we don't have a lot of dog ticks, Lone Star ticks, Gulf Coast ticks we see within the city. So if you're in the city, you're probably fine. If you end up moving that way and those aspects, then you're probably going to need to do some checking of yourself and then your pets more frequently for ticks.
Gotcha. So it's probably more of a concern if you're butting up against like a forest, or if you're in a more rural setting.
Or you're butting up against like a very large park system.
Yeah.
Too.
Okay, and then the other question we have here is about, as we talked a lot about like the pests and their increased populations and how this might cause an increase in vector-borne diseases. But I'm curious if either of you are aware of ways that our health infrastructure, the health departments, health service providers might be ramping up research for effective treatments and access to information testing and care, both, Western allopathic pharmaceutical based, as well as more holistic health based.
Yeah, so we don't have enough people in public health right now. So there's actually a really big push by the CDC to fund programs to train people so that they could go into the public health workforce. So the Association of Public Health Laboratories, for example, I partner with them to train interns on how to work on mosquito and tick research projects. So there's a big push, because part of the problem right now is that we don't have enough manpower to do as much monitoring as, a lot of the health departments around here would like to do. It's really county by county or region by region, depending on how the health departments are set up, what they're able to do. And so, I partner with the Northern Kentucky Health Department on a lot of my research projects because they don't have the manpower. But there is a big push nationally to try to increase that ability.
Yeah, there is, but there's still just nowhere near enough money to do it everywhere in those aspects. Like the NIH funds a lot of the research, National Institutes of Health, and the funding's been either flat or going down. There was a little bit more money from the CDC the past few years, but that's for some like targeted center areas, and it's kind of just, that is really only barely replace the reductions from like NIH and the National Science Foundation. So it's personnel and a funding issue. So people still need jobs and that sort of thing, and there's just not enough support.
So another example of emerging green job sector. Yeah, I mean, I just anecdotally, I know a bunch of people who have Lyme disease, have gotten Lyme disease, and they've been able to effectively manage the chronic symptoms with their diet and supplements and stuff like that. So I'm always interested to hear if there's ways that we're increasing that resilience in the health sector. I'll pass it back unless there's more questions here. Savannah, did you want to talk about this blog and media toolkit?
Yeah, I can just share real quick. So every month, in tandem with the webinar. We publish a blog and a social media toolkit so you can raise awareness about these issues and dive even deeper on these issues. So you can see that link there. It's our This Bites blog. But I think I'll pass it back to Bamidele now.
All right, thank you, Savannah. So thank you, Dr. Josh and Dr. Allison. We really appreciate your time here. And also thank you to all our audience. So moving forward, what can we do? What can institution do? Just want to enjoin everyone to adopt climate resilient strategies, including, just to add to what our panelists have said about, one is to, what individual can do is to wear protective clothing, especially when you're going to grassy area and also woody area. Apply bug spray. Avoid touching wild animals, including deers, carus, and others. Prevent standing water, as was said by one of our panelists. So also pay attention to inspect yourself and clothing for hiding insects, especially when you're being inside for a longer period of time. So for what can the community do? Institutions do is, one is to share information about vector-borne illnesses and how to prevent them, and also to advocate for vaccine and treatment research funding, and to manage stormwater and runoff to prevent standing water around, and also to handle trash effectively, including food waste properly to prevent rodent and insect population. So we have a couple of announcements as we wrap up today. So one of it is later today we have between 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. we have a green drink. So at high grade B rate. So please join us if you have time today. On June 4th, we have Climate Safe Neighborhood at Covington, which is in Kentucky, between 5:30 and 7 p.m., which is basically at the 6th District Elementary School. So please join us that time. Also, on June 5th, we have Greater Cincinnati Green School Yard Summit, which is at Aiken High School. Please, it's all day event. We enjoin everyone to also join us in this event. So on the June 13th, we have two basic events. So the first one is our next climate health equity webinar, which is climate change and heat islands and health outcomes. So it's between 12 noon to 1 p.m. And also that same day, we have listening to an engaging community working group, which is between 12 noon and 1 p.m. Please also join us, especially for our members. So, and other things, please visit our website, greenumbrella.org, and to get engaged and also to participate in our solutions. So we thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next month for our exciting topic. Thank you.
Thanks, Bami. And I just wanted to chime in. Tonight's Green Drinks is at the High Green Brentwood location, which is their new location. So don't come to Pleasant Ridge area. Come to Silverton. Don't go to the Silverton one. Go to their Brentwood, their new Brentwood location. But everything's on our website. If you go to greenumbrella.org/events, you can find all of these events and more.